Put that bag down, Mara. Tell me where you go every night, or you're fired. Elijah Crane's voice cut through the marble corridor like a cold blade. She didn't flinch. 2 bags hung from her hands, one sagging with wrapped food, the other packed with papers. The chandelier above hummed softly. Outside, waves from Harbor City's bay hit the seawall and echoed through the glass. Mara Delane kept her eyes on the floor. "I finish at 6, sir." That isn't an answer. Elijah stepped closer, polished shoes whispering on stone. "You leave before dark. You return after 9. If you're taking from my house, I don't steal." The words were quiet but solid. He studied her. Small frame, work-tired shoulders, a dress mended at the hem. The first bag smelled faintly of bread and pepper stew. The other was a thin rectangle of weight and worry. Photocopies, forms, a blue folder bent at the corner. "Open them." "No." The refusal startled him more than he let show. People did not tell Elijah Crane no. Boards did not. Bankers did not. Governors did not. A maid in a gray dress certainly did not. "Be at the gate by 6 tomorrow," he said finally. "If you won't tell me where you go, I'll find out myself." He turned away before she could reply. But the marble held his reflection, sharp, precise, and emptier than he expected. Night came with a salt-wet wind. Neon washed over the harbor road, glass towers throwing gold ribbons onto the water. Elijah drove alone for the first time in months. A cap pulled low, the dashboard light smearing the car's interior with quiet blue. At 5:58, Mara stepped out of the side door of Crane House. Same 2 bags. Same steady pace. No taxi, no driver. She walked. Elijah followed at a distance, headlights dimmed. The gates of the wealthy receded into the dark, traded for shuttered storefronts and graffiti the color of bruise. Harbor City had many names. In the glossy magazines, it was a coastal jewel. In the back streets, it was a ledger of unpaid debts. Mara moved like someone who knew both maps by heart. They passed a bus shelter where a boy held a school book under the street lamp, lips moving over words that would not stay still. They passed a hotel where the lobby musicians played for travelers who never looked up. They passed a queue at a clinic window, people clutching plastic folders, waiting for signatures they did not understand. The city carried the rich like a parade. It carried everyone else like cargo. Mara boarded a yellow municipal bus with peeling paint. Elijah parked and slipped into a taxi, 2 cars behind the bus, eyes never leaving the back door. The driver kept glancing in the mirror. Harbor City drivers read faces for danger the way sailors read the sky. "You're following someone," the driver said finally. "I'm following a question." They rattled over the river bridge where the barges slept like dark islands. Laundry lines cut the sky above tenements. A billboard blew in the wind. Luxury condos, bright smiles, a promise that laughed at its own lie. The bus stopped in the old dock district. Warehouses slumped near the water, their brick spines bent with years. A trio of teens kicked a dented can down the curb. A woman in a hotel uniform counted coins for a steaming box of noodles and shared it with a man in a reflective vest. Mara stepped off. No hesitation. She moved past a row of shuttered repair shops, through a narrow alley, and into a lot where the pavement gave up and the earth came through. A chain-link gate stood open, a plastic banner flapping on 2 zip ties. Harbor House. Open nights, free help with forms. Free meals. Free classes. Elijah killed the taxi's interior light and watched. He told himself he was waiting for the theft to reveal itself, for the rule he'd made about trust to be proven sober and correct. But when Mara pushed through the side door, the noise he expected, chaos, bargaining, didn't come. What came instead was the low rumble of people trying not to be heard. He crossed the street and stood in the shadow of a leaning lamppost. Inside, he counted maybe 30 people, a grandmother with a plastic bag of medicine, a laborer with a splint on his hand, a woman with a baby asleep on her chest, a security guard still in his uniform, eyes burned with fatigue. There was no stage, no banner inside, just mismatched chairs and a crooked whiteboard. Mara set her food bag on a table and began to unwrap bread into neat halves. She placed water bottles in a line. She checked the wall clock, took a breath, and lifted the stack of papers from the second bag. A man approached her with a folded bill. She pushed it back gently and shook her head. He tried again. She closed his fingers over the money and moved his hand to his pocket. He nodded. His face unlocked. Elijah felt something unfamiliar loosen behind his ribs. A small thread pulled through tight fabric. Mara wrote 3 words on the whiteboard. Clinic admission form. Hands went up. Not nervous hands. Hungry ones, she smiled. She didn't smile at him in the house. Here she did. Not a performance. A light turned toward people who had waited in the dark too long. He checked his watch and found that minutes had slipped without permission. The bay wind had turned colder. At the end of the block, a siren wound past and died into distance. Harbor City breathed in layers, the waterfront's polished air, and this, the deeper, heavier air that carried the taste of working nights. Elijah had climbed out of that air once. He had promised himself he would never breathe it again. Yet here he stood, held by an open door and a woman with 2 bags. What do you owe the people you pass on your way up when the elevator doors close and silence makes it easy to forget they exist? He stayed. It began simply. Mara drew a rectangle on the whiteboard. Full name, she said, speaking slowly. The name on your ID, even if the letters don't fit your mouth yet. She handed forms across the room. Not all hands reached. Pride is a heavy object when you lift it in public. So she walked instead, chair by chair, name by name. A grandmother squinted. I never learned to spell the long one. Mara knelt beside her. We'll use the name you carry in your bones. Then we make the paper match. The room loosened. A laugh surfaced, small and embarrassed. Then another, bigger, relieved. Dignity, when it returns, does it slowly, like dawn over water. Elijah could have left. He could have marked this as charity and filed it under staff. Curiosities. A line item beside. Uniform replacement and seasonal bonus. He could have gone home and poured. Something that burned. He stayed. A security. Guard with a crooked wrist held up a form. They told me to come back with these boxes filled. I can't read these words fast enough. Mara set a finger under each line. Allergies? None. Prior surgeries? 1. Your address? We'll write it together. Slowly is not the same as never. He took the pen. His hand shook. He wrote anyway. Beside the window, a teenage boy, shirt too thin for the cold, watched without moving. Mara brought him bread. He hesitated, expecting a transaction. She waited for his eyes to lift and meet hers. Eat, she said. No one earns food here. They just need it. Elijah noticed the details that never entered his meetings. The way people sat with their backs to walls, habit, not choice. The way they protected their bags with a foot hooked through the straps. The way relief looked, not like celebration, but like muscle unclenching. On the wall, a peeling map of Harbor City still showed the old shipping lanes. The rich neighborhoods near the water glowed under new names like the Promenade. The districts inland kept their same letters, frayed at the edges like a coat worn through at the elbows. A man in a hotel uniform stepped carefully to the whiteboard. My wife is at St. Mercy. They asked me to sign consent. I didn't want to sign wrong. Let's read it together, Mara said. You won't sign anything you don't understand. Not tonight. He sagged in his chair, an exhale that had been waiting a long time to leave. Elijah pressed a hand against the doorway. He thought about how his hotel sold perfect signatures, white-gloved service, heavy paper, embossed keys that said, "Trust us in gold." He thought about the sentence his father had repeated on the docks. Paper is where they hide the gate. If you can't read it, you can't enter. He had run from that gate and built one of his own. Now he watched a woman without money teach people to pass through, not by pretending the gate was fair, but by giving them the key anyway. The wind rose. The zip ties on the banner hiccuped. A volunteer in a faded college sweatshirt pushed a space heater closer to the circle. Mara passed out small pencil nubs, the kind schools throw away. No one complained. They gripped them like tools found after a storm. Elijah saw the second bag open at last. A folder of photocopied forms: hospital, bank, housing, school, the bureaucratic spine of a city that asked for ink the way a body asks for blood. She worked the room in quiet loops, returning to each person until confusion thinned. When someone stumbled, she didn't let them apologize. She made space for the stumble. She protected the work from shame. For a moment, Elijah saw the other version of his night: a private dining room, a decanted wine, a laugh too loud at a story told to people who would forget it by morning. He blinked and the room returned, the room that would not make any magazine, the room where the city told the truth about itself and waited for someone to listen. "Break," Mara said softly, as if volume could shatter courage. "Eat now. We'll finish the forms in 10 minutes. She refilled cups from a plastic water jug. She gave the biggest share to the man with the hotel uniform. She chose the bread heel, the rough piece, for herself. The teenage boy finally spoke. Do you help with school forms too?" "All forms," she said. "No one misses school because ink got in the way." He nodded without looking at her. Pride negotiated with hunger. It chose both. Elijah slid his hands into his coat pockets to keep them from doing something foolish, like reaching for his wallet and trying to fix a system with a receipt. Money could build a roof. It could buy tables and working heaters. But it couldn't give back the moment that happened here, where a person learned that the line where they were stopped yesterday did not need to be the line today. Mara returned to the whiteboard. Next session, banking forms. No one should be charged a week's wages for a mistake in a box. The room hummed again. People finished food, wiped their mouths with the backs of their hands, straightened papers. The grandmother practiced her signature on scrap paper, smiling when the letters stopped shaking. The man with the splint sat taller. The security guard flexed his wrist as if the words he now understood had eased the pain. Elijah looked down at his phone. A message waited from his assistant. A foreign investor had landed early. A board member wanted a favor. A columnist had requested a quote about Harbor City's upward glow. He typed nothing. Mara stacked completed forms and secured them with a rubber band. She checked a list taped to the wall. Rent clinic tomorrow, printer ink low, heater failing, volunteers needed Friday. Not a plea, a ledger of work, the opposite of spectacle. As people drifted to the door, Mara pressed a folded bus pass into the teenage boy's palm. "For the morning." "Don't sell it." "I won't." "I believe you." He tucked it into his shoe. Elijah stepped back into the alley shadow as the crowd thinned. The night had sharpened. Harbor House hummed like a small engine pushing a heavy ship. Mara turned off the string of donated lights one by one. She stood alone in the doorway, bags lighter now, eyes adjusting to the dark outside. For an instant, she leaned her head against the frame, the way a runner folds at the waist after the finish line. Then she straightened, closed the door, and began the walk back. Elijah stayed with the silence that followed. We like to believe inequality is a policy issue, something to be debated at clever tables. But it lives in smaller rooms, on forms people cannot read, at counters that close early for some and open longer for others. In the long walk home when bus passes cost more than the distance between hunger and food. He watched her disappear into the city that used her and needed her in the same breath. He finally exhaled. If this is what one woman can carry in 2 bags, imagine what a city could carry if it chose dignity first. Stay with us, because what happens after tonight will test whether wealth can do more than admire the light from a distance. Elijah Crane returned home before midnight. The mansion sat on the edge of the bay, its windows glowing like a ship that refused to sink. From the outside, it was perfect: steel, glass, precision. Inside, it felt like someone had forgotten to turn the heart back on. He walked past the portraits in the hallway, men in tailored suits, women wrapped in quiet luxury. None of them smiled. They didn't need to. Money had erased the need for expression. He poured a drink but didn't taste it. His reflection in the glass wall followed him like a second shadow. It looked older than he remembered, not in years, but in distance. From everything that used to matter, the images from the night clung to him. The plastic banner, the mismatched chairs, the people learning to spell their names as if rewriting the map of their existence. And Mara, her hands steady, her voice patient, her silence heavier than his entire empire. He sat at his desk, opened his laptop, and pulled up the staff file again. Mara Delane, domestic assistant, 18 months of serviced education, none listed, dependents, none declared, address, incomplete, incomplete. He stared at that word until it blurred. At the bottom of the file, there was a section labeled Previous Employment, blank except for one smudged entry. Harbor District School volunteer? He leaned back, fingers pressed to his temples. Volunteer. He remembered the alley, the heater, the quiet smiles, and suddenly the hierarchy of his world, the one he'd spent decades defending, didn't look like order anymore. It looked like blindness dressed in good lighting. From the balcony, the city shimmered below, split cleanly in two. The skyline of wealth and the dark sprawl where light cost too much to keep on. He had climbed from that sprawl once, as the son of a dock worker who taught him that success was survival, not fairness. Never look back, his father used to say. The past will pull you under. But now the past had a face, a quiet one that smiled at strangers learning to read. He opened his tablet and searched Harbor House. The same page appeared, the small website, pixelated photos, donation link inactive. There was a section titled Mission Statement. We help adults navigate forms, clinics, and systems that forget their names. Dignity begins with understanding. Dignity. The word sounded expensive. Yet there it was, offered for free in a room that could barely afford its own light bulbs. He clicked the donation tab. It didn't load. The screen froze, like the universe was mocking him for thinking money could repair conscience in a single swipe. He closed the laptop, but his mind refused to shut. Every sound in the mansion grew louder. The ticking clock, the hum of electricity, the echo of his own breath. He remembered the man at the center asking for help with his wife's hospital forms. How long had it been since Elijah filled one out himself? Years. From the window, he could see the harbor again, distant and black. The lights of the rich quarter glowed like a constellation, arranged by architects and guarded by gates. Beyond that, the poorer district flickered in irregular rhythm, lights dying, returning, fighting to stay on. He realized then that the two parts of the city were connected by more than roads. They were connected by silence, his silence, the kind that let things stay unfair as long as they stayed unseen. He turned off the lamp and stood in the dark. For the first time, darkness didn't feel like privacy. It felt like witness. Outside, a distant horn echoed from the docks, the sound of ships leaving with everything the city refused to share. He spoke quietly. To no one. Tomorrow I follow again. Morning arrived gray, the kind of light that forgets which side of the city it belongs to. Elijah Crane didn't sleep. His thoughts had turned the night inside out. Images of the harbor house, of Mara's voice guiding strangers through words that governments forgot to make kind. He sat at the breakfast table, still in his shirt from the night before, watching sunlight crawl across untouched silverware. The mansion's silence wasn't peaceful anymore. It was accusing. When Mara appeared from the kitchen with his usual tray, tea, toast, a plate arranged by habit, he spoke without looking up. Sit. She froze. Sir? I said sit. The tray trembled slightly as she placed it down. She sat opposite him, spine straight, eyes low. I followed you last night. Her hands stilled, folded over each other. I wasn't stealing. I know. That stopped her. He met her gaze then, and for the first time she didn't look away. Behind her calm there was something steady, something that didn't need permission to exist. You run a center, he continued. At the docks. Harbor House. She said nothing. Her silence wasn't fear. It was measure. You feed people, he added. You teach them. You fix what the city breaks. Mara finally spoke, voice soft but unwavering. No one fixes the city, sir. We just try to stop the bleeding. The words landed heavier than accusation. He leaned back. Why didn't you ask for help? Her smile was faint, almost pitying. Help isn't free. It comes with stories attached. I didn't want to become one. He exhaled slowly, a sound between frustration and admiration. How long have you been doing this? 2 years, she said. Before you hired me. After my husband died, I started teaching the workers in our building. Some couldn't read the signs at the clinic, so I wrote them out, drew pictures. Then more came. Her eyes flicked to the window, to the bay where cranes bent their necks over cargo ships. Now we rent the old shipping office. The roof leaks, but the words don't. Elijah's throat tightened. Why keep working here if you already have a purpose? Because the people at Harbor House still need rent, and my pay here buys chalk and paper. He stared at her as if seeing an equation he couldn't solve. For years, he'd measured worth by efficiency, profit margins, project timelines, the logic of gain. But this woman had redefined value with what she gave away. The tea went cold. The air thickened with unspoken things. Finally, Elijah asked, "What do you need?" Mara's laugh was small but edged. "You can't buy what I need. Try me. I need time," she said. Time for people to stop being afraid of words. Time for a mother to fill a hospital form without begging someone richer to explain it. He looked down at his hands. They had once known the weight of ropes, the grit of the docks, before his suits erased the memory. Somewhere along the climb, he'd convinced himself that rising above meant never looking down. Mara stood. "If you'll excuse me, sir, I have to finish the laundry before the rain." But as she turned, he said quietly, "Mara, do you ever wonder why people like me exist?" She paused, still facing the door. "To prove what power looks like when it forgets its reflection." The words cut through the morning light. She left without waiting for a response. Elijah sat back, the echo of her sentence circling the room like a verdict. He spent the rest of the day pacing his office. Every document he signed, contracts, supply orders, lease renewals, suddenly looked like a relic from a smaller world. His name appeared on every page, but none of them meant anything close to what she had written on that whiteboard the night before. At noon, a storm began to gather above the bay. The wind pressed against the glass, flattening the water into steel. Rain fell in thin vertical lines, turning the city into a painting with streaks of grief. Elijah watched the servants move quietly through the halls, their steps rehearsed, their eyes trained to avoid contact. He wondered how many of them carried hidden lives just as large, just as invisible. When the thunder broke, he thought of Mara walking through that same rain, 2 bags again in her hands. The food and the papers, hope and proof. He picked up the phone, then put it down. There was no call that could bridge the distance between guilt and purpose. For the rest of the day, the city stayed gray. By nightfall, Elijah stood once more at the balcony. Harbor City glittered like a lie told beautifully. From up here, inequality was aesthetic, lights in a pattern, darkness as decoration. But he knew now what that darkness held. He whispered to the rain, though no one was near enough to hear, "I thought I owned this city. Turns out I just rented its silence." The water below swallowed the sound. What he didn't know was that silence was already cracking, because the woman he'd underestimated was about to make the city listen. Night returned. With the quiet authority of a secret, Elijah Crane stood. In his study, lights dimmed, watching raindrops race down the glass wall. The city's reflection trembled in each one, small fragments of a world that pretended not to break. He'd spent the day fighting an impulse he didn't understand, an urge to do something beyond signing checks and issuing commands. He wasn't used to uncertainty. The unknown was for other people, the ones who lived without options. But now it followed him through the hallways like a conscience he couldn't silence. The doorbell rang once, soft but deliberate. He opened the door himself. Outside stood a young man, soaked, wearing a maintenance jacket from one of his hotels. In his hands, a torn envelope. "Sir, they told me to bring this," Elijah frowned. "From where?" The man hesitated. "Harbor House. Miss Delane said you might want to see it." She'd written to him? He tore the envelope open. Inside was a single sheet of paper. No letterhead, no signature. Just a printed list of items, rent due, 3 months heater repair, urgent volunteer stipends, pending literacy material, depleted, at the bottom, A handwritten note in blue ink. We're not asking for charity, just light. No greeting, no name. Yet it carried more honesty than the stack of polished reports on his desk. He folded the page carefully, as though afraid to crease its truth, and looked up. The messenger was still standing in the rain, hesitant, waiting. Did she say anything else? Elijah asked. For the first time, she smiled not as an employee, but as an equal. Then you might see more clearly tonight. He looked around. You sent me a list. I sent the truth, she replied. The kind that doesn't fit in your ledgers. Her tone wasn't defiant. It was factual, like weather. He moved closer. Why keep this place alive? It's falling apart. Because it's all we have, she said simply. When people can read, they stop being ghosts. They can fight back. Her eyes found his. You build hotels for travelers. I build rooms for the forgotten. Both are shelters. One just costs less to enter. Elijah didn't answer. The lamp flickered between them, gold light cutting through the damp air. He reached into his coat, pulled out a small leather pouch, and set it on the table. For the rent. Mara looked at it, then at him. That's not how this works. I'm not buying anything. Good, she said, because dignity isn't for sale. The wind shifted through the cracks in the door, scattering the papers on the table. One sheet landed at Elijah's feet, a worksheet filled with names written in shaky handwriting. He picked it up. Each name was a promise trying to become a signature. He placed the paper back carefully. Tomorrow, she said quietly, the council might close this place. The building isn't up to code. We'll find another. You'll keep teaching? As long as there's someone left who believes they're too small to matter. Outside, thunder rolled again, softer this time, like the city clearing its throat. Elijah looked around the room, at the cracked plaster, the broken window, the courage. You call this light? He asked. Mara smiled. Yes, the kind that doesn't ask permission to shine. By the time the storm cleared, the city smelled of metal and new chances. Mara locked the classroom door and slipped the key into her pocket. Elijah stayed inside, still scanning the modest room as if memorizing its gravity. The silence between them wasn't heavy. It was instructive. It said, now you see what survival looks like when it isn't gilded. You shouldn't be here, she said finally. People talk when the powerful visit the poor. Let them talk, he answered. Maybe they'll finally say something true. Mara tilted her head, half a smile playing on her lips. Truth doesn't pay rent. Elijah stepped closer, eyes tracing the walls patched with tape and peeling paint. Then I'll cover the rent. Quietly, no names. You think money is invisible? She asked. It leaves fingerprints, even when you mean well. He wanted to argue, but the words caught somewhere between guilt and admiration. Do you believe everyone can be saved? He asked instead. No, she said. But I believe everyone deserves the chance to learn how. Her answer stilled him. He thought of the men who called him visionary, of the speeches he'd given about progress. Not once had he mentioned dignity. It wasn't a measurable return. Mara gathered papers into a neat stack. You grew up here, didn't you? He nodded slowly. Before the city changed its name. Then you know what this place does to people who fall behind. He did. The docs had taught him that the poor didn't drown. They were simply kept busy learning how to breathe underwater. I used to think poverty was a flaw, he said. Now I see it's engineered. Mara didn't respond, but something in her eyes softened. Outside, footsteps echoed down the corridor. The door opened and a boy appeared, the same teenager from before, clutching a damp notebook. Mara, he said nervously. The landlord came again. He said next week's the last. Mara's face didn't change, but her fingers tightened around the papers. All right, Jalen, go home. I'll handle it. The boy hesitated, glancing at Elijah. Who's he? Mara looked at Elijah as if deciding what truth he was ready to own. A man learning how to see. The boy frowned but nodded and left. Elijah let the words settle. Learning how to see. That was the precise humiliation of awakening. You realized how blind comfort had made you. He turned back to her. "How much is the rent?" She hesitated, then said quietly, "800 a month." He almost laughed. His cufflinks cost more. "I'll pay a year in advance." "No, why not?" "Because if you pay it," she said, "it becomes your story. I want it to stay ours." He studied her face, searching for the crack that would let him feel absolved. There wasn't one. "You don't make this easy," he murmured. "I don't think change should be easy." She walked toward the window, watching the lights of the harbor blink like exhausted eyes. "Do you ever think about the people who—" "Clean those windows of yours, sir. The ones who make the view clear but can't afford to see it?" He did now. Every pane of glass in his hotels suddenly felt like confession. When she turned back, the lamp's light caught the small scar on her wrist. Faint, deliberate, healed. He wanted to ask where it came from, but something told him not to. Some histories don't need extraction, they need respect. She sat down, exhaustion pulling at her shoulders. "The council will come Monday. They'll measure, take pictures, decide this place is too broken to deserve saving?" He glanced around. "Then they'll build something new?" She shook her head. "They'll build nothing. They'll leave a gap and call it renewal." The room fell quiet again. Only the sound of the harbor filtered through, the low groan of cranes shifting cargo, the sigh of water against stone. Elijah spoke softly. "What if I help you move it? Somewhere safe, somewhere legal?" Mara looked at him for a long moment. "You mean somewhere respectable? Is that wrong?" "No," she said, "but respectability is just another wall. We're trying to build doors." Her voice was calm, but her eyes gleamed with a fire that made him uneasy. He'd met world leaders who never made him feel this small. He picked up one of the notebooks from the table. Inside, the handwriting of adults who had only recently learned the alphabet sprawled unevenly. Next to one name, a sentence. "I can sign my child's school form now." Elijah closed the notebook, as if it burned. "You've built something bigger than a classroom," he said. "I've built something small enough to fit inside people," she replied. "That's why it grows." For a long time, neither spoke. The rain had stopped completely. The air tasted of damp metal and slow resolve. When Elijah finally left, the streetlights flickered across puddles like broken mirrors. Harbor House loomed behind him, fragile, temporary, alive. He walked back uphill toward the silent mansions, shoes heavy with water and thought. The city around him seemed to watch, waiting to see what kind of man he'd decide to be now that he could no longer plead ignorance. The night ended without ceremony. But further down, an article almost hidden in the corner. Community center faces eviction. No photo. No outrage. Just 8 lines describing the closure of a small educational shelter in the dock area. He folded the page, slipped it into his pocket, and kept walking. By noon, he stood before the old shipping office again. The banner still flapped above the gate, Harbor House, letters faded but proud. Inside, the same mismatched chairs, the same wall map. A single kettle hissed on a portable stove. Mara looked up, startled but not surprised. "You found your way again," he smiled faintly. "I wasn't done learning. Classes don't start until evening. I'm not here for lessons." "Then what for?" "To listen," he said. She studied him for a long moment before nodding toward a stack of boxes. "Then help me move these. The floor's rotting near the back wall." He rolled up his sleeves. The gesture felt foreign but right. They worked in silence, lifting, shifting, sweeping. Dust rose in small clouds that caught the sunlight leaking through cracked windows. After a while, he said, "Do you ever rest?" "Rest is expensive," she answered. He almost laughed. You always have an answer. Because people like me aren't allowed silence. Silence looked suspicious on the poor. Her tone wasn't bitter. It was factual, carved from experience. They paused near the window. Outside, children chased a plastic bottle down the street. A man fixed a tire with borrowed tools. Life, relentless and unspectacular, went on. Mara spoke quietly. When they demolish this place, they'll say it was progress. They'll show blueprints for something new, something glass. But glass doesn't shelter anyone. It just reflects who's already inside. Elijah leaned against the wall. You're fighting a machine. I'm reminding it we exist. He watched her. The way her words carried calm fury. The kind that doesn't need shouting because it's already survived the worst noise. Do you hate the rich? He asked suddenly. She blinked. No, I hate the distance. The answer landed somewhere deep. He thought of the first time he signed a $1 million contract, how proud he'd been to leave that distance behind, not realizing he'd been building it higher with every success. I want to help, he said quietly. You already are, she replied. You're here. That's where it starts. For a moment, neither moved. The sunlight broke through the cloud cover, slanting across the floorboards. The old wood gleamed like something remembering it was once alive. Mara picked up a folder and handed it to him. If you really want to listen, read these. Stories from our students. We collect them instead of certificates. He opened the folder. Each page held a paragraph written in uncertain handwriting. I can write my name now. My son no longer translates the rent paper for me. I want to teach someone else next. Each sentence was a quiet revolution. He looked up. You should publish this, she smiled. No one would read it. There's no scandal in hope. Then we'll make them read, he said. We? He hesitated, then nodded. If you'll let me stand beside you. For the first time, Mara's expression softened into something almost tender. Then stand still first. Learn what it feels like to wait. Outside, the sound of distant cranes echoed across the bay, machines lifting metal, as two people in a fragile room began lifting something far heavier, the idea that power could change sides. Monday came early, thick with the kind of sunlight that makes endings look polite. Elijah reached the docks before the council vans arrived. The street smelled of salt and bureaucracy, damp paper, diesel, and anticipation. Harbor House looked smaller than ever, standing alone between two cranes and a half-finished luxury complex. The new building's steel beams threw long shadows over the cracked roof, as if swallowing the light that once belonged here. Mara was already outside, folding chairs, her movements calm but precise. A few volunteers gathered near the steps, one adjusting the banner, another stacking books into a plastic crate. No one spoke of fear. They were too used to loss to name it out loud. Are they coming? Elijah asked. They always come, she said without looking up. He noticed her hands again, steady, not shaking. The kind of steadiness that comes only when you've already accepted every possible outcome. A van pulled up. 3 officials stepped out, followed by a man in a gray suit with a tablet. His name badge caught the light. Urban Renewal Department. Miss Delane? He said briskly. We're here to begin assessment. Mara wiped her palms on her apron. The roof leaks. The wiring's old. The foundation cracks in 3 places. You'll find every reason you need, the man blinked, caught off guard by her composure. Then you understand this structure is unsafe. Unsafe doesn't mean unworthy, she replied. Elijah stepped forward. There's still time for reconsideration. I can fund restoration, meet compliance. The man checked his tablet. We appreciate philanthropy, Mr. Crane, but the city's plan for this block is already approved. Mixed-use redevelopment. Affordable units, community space. Mara cut in. Community space without community, he frowned. Excuse me? You'll build rooms but not belonging, she said. You'll replace a place where people found their voices with one where they can't afford to stay. The officials shifted uncomfortably. Bureaucracy rarely met poetry at this distance. Elijah watched her, silent. Every sentence she spoke made the polished language of his world sound counterfeit. A second van arrived, men in safety vests stepping out, carrying orange cones and measuring tape. The ritual of erasure had begun. Mara turned to Elijah. "You should go. They'll be polite because of you, but when you leave, they'll finish faster." "I'm not leaving." Her voice softened. "You can't fight everything with presence." "I can try," he said quietly. The man in the gray suit cleared his throat. "We'll begin inspection now. Please stand back." Elijah's temper flickered. "You're standing in a classroom. Do you see it?" The official looked around, unmoved. "I see a structure scheduled for demolition." Mara placed a hand on Elijah's arm, a gesture both grounding and final. "Let them see what they need to." He turned toward her. "You don't deserve this." "Deserve," she repeated softly, "is a word rich people invented to make peace with luck." The wind caught her scarf, lifting it slightly, like punctuation on truth. By mid-morning, the assessment was over. One of the workers taped a yellow notice to the door, "Condemned, entry prohibited." The paper fluttered in the wind, its authority louder than any voice. The officials packed up. Their tires left marks in the mud, signatures of progress. The volunteers stood in a loose circle, silent. Some cried quietly, others simply watched the building as if waiting for it to breathe one more time. Elijah spoke first. "You'll move somewhere else." "I'll find it. I'll pay for it." Mara shook her head. "Not yet. Why?" "Because if we leave quietly, they'll call it consent." He didn't understand until he saw her step onto the small concrete step, face turned toward the cameras from a local news van that had just arrived. The reporter called out, "Miss Delane, what happens now?" Mara's answer was calm, deliberate. "Nothing happens. That's the problem. The city builds walls and calls it development. We'll stand here until someone listens." Elijah moved beside her, rain beginning to fall again. The reporter turned to him. "Mr. Crane, you're known as one of the city's most influential developers." "Why are you here?" He hesitated, then said quietly, "Because influence means nothing when it's used to protect comfort instead of justice." A hush spread through the crowd. Cameras clicked. The officials looked uneasy. Somewhere in the background, a siren wailed, a fitting soundtrack to rebellion that wasn't loud but wouldn't stop. Mara faced the reporter again. Some called it a publicity stunt. Others called it courage. A few called it proof that guilt was finally learning how to speak. Elijah Crane didn't read the comments, but he didn't need to. His phone became an alarm, buzzing with calls, texts, interview requests, and polite panic from his publicist. "Sir," she said, her voice tight with disbelief, "the board wants to know if this is a statement." "It's not," Elijah said. "It's a fact, but facts need framing." "Mr. Crane, people don't know what to think until we tell them." Then, "Maybe they should start thinking for themselves." He hung up. Before she could answer, the sound of the disconnect echoed through the marble office, crisp and final. For the first time, silence didn't feel lonely. It felt earned. Down at the docks, the story took on its own life. Volunteers from other neighborhoods began arriving. Students, nurses, taxi drivers, some carrying books, others carrying food. They weren't sure what movement they had joined, but they knew they wanted in. Harbor House became a symbol overnight. The condemned building, once invisible, now drew crowds. The yellow notice on its door was no longer a warning. It was a rallying flag. Someone had scrawled across it in black marker, "Unsafe." Maybe the system is. Mara watched all this unfold with cautious disbelief. The same people who once ignored the center were now filming themselves donating supplies, quoting her words online. "You should be proud," one volunteer said. "You've started something," she shook her head. "I didn't start it. The city did, by closing its eyes too long." Elijah arrived that afternoon dressed simply, without his entourage. The crowd parted for him, a mixture of awe and suspicion in their faces. Wealth had finally stepped into the wrong side of town and no one quite knew what to do with it. Mara was speaking to a group of reporters. Her words were measured, her tone even. "We don't need saviors," she said. "We need partners. Justice isn't charity, it's recognition." When she finished, Elijah walked up quietly. "You have a gift," he said. "People listen better when you stop asking for permission." He smiled faintly. You realize the city council can't ignore this now. I'm not sure they ever saw us clearly enough to ignore us, she replied. But now they'll have to choose. Behind them, a bus passed slowly, passengers leaning out to take pictures. The driver honked once, a sound somewhere between support and disbelief. That evening, the mayor's office released a statement. We commend community efforts to improve literacy and inclusion. A new facility will be proposed for displaced programs in the dock district. The press called it progress. Mara called it spin. It's a way to move the story away from the building, she said. They think if they give us a new one, we'll forget what they took. Elijah nodded. Then we don't let them write the ending. Later, as dusk settled, they sat on the steps of Harbor House, the sea wind threading through their silence. Do you regret it? Mara asked suddenly. What? Standing here, losing investors, making enemies in rooms that still decide things. Elijah looked out at the horizon, where cranes blinked like tired stars. I used to think those rooms decided everything. Now I think they just delay it. She studied him for a moment. You're not like them. I was, he said softly, until I saw what the world looked like from the other side of my own windows. A pause stretched between them. Then Mara said, almost to herself, maybe that's all justice is, windows breaking just enough to let the air in. The phrase lingered in the salt-heavy air, a fragile definition that felt truer than any law. Across the street, a boy taped a handwritten sign to a pole, free classes, same time, until the walls fall. People stopped to read it. Some smiled. Others nodded. The rumor of something possible had begun to spread. When night came, Harbor City didn't sleep. Conversations spilled into cafes, online threads, and council chambers. For the first time, the city's wealth had to look at itself in a mirror that didn't flatter. Mara stayed late, sorting papers under a dim lamp. Elijah watched her from the doorway. You should rest, he said. I will, when they stop calling us temporary. Her voice wasn't tired. It was resolute. He stepped outside, the air cool and clean after the rain. Down the block, a mural had appeared overnight, paint still wet, colors bleeding together. It showed a woman holding a book, her silhouette outlined by gold light. Beneath it, 3 words, See me now. Elijah stood before it for a long time. The mural wasn't just about Mara. It was about the city, about him, about every name that had been small until someone spoke it aloud. And in that still moment, he understood. Revolutions don't always start with noise. Sometimes they begin with the sound of a door refusing to close. By midweek, the storm wasn't in the sky. It was on every screen. Morning shows dissected the photo. Night anchors replayed the same clip, the billionaire standing beside the woman who refused his money. Commentators turned their story into a spectacle, debating morality between commercials for luxury cars. Is this redemption or rebellion? One host asked. Both, another replied. And the city's not ready for either. Elijah watched the coverage from his office window, sound muted. His company's logo gleamed behind him, a silver crane lifting toward a horizon that now felt dishonest. His assistant entered quietly. Sir, the board meeting's in 10 minutes. He didn't move. Cancel it, she froze. Sir, that's not... Cancel it, he repeated without raising his voice. Tell them I'm busy rebuilding something that matters. He turned back to the window. From this high, Harbor House was just a dot near the docks. But he knew that dot was where the city's pulse had shifted. Hours later, he found himself once again on the worn steps of that condemned building. The crowd had thinned, but the air still buzzed with stubborn energy. Inside, Mara was packing supplies into boxes. Her face was calm, but the lines around her eyes betrayed exhaustion. You shouldn't be here, she said when she saw him. The press is hunting you. Let them, Elijah replied. Maybe they'll finally film something real. She smiled faintly. They don't film reality. They film angles. He walked closer. Then we changed the angle. She looked at him, skeptical but curious. You plan to fight the system with sound bites? No, he said. With stories. He handed her a small folder. Inside were photographs, students from Harbor House, their handwritten lines beneath each picture. I can fill hospital forms now. I opened my first bank account. I read my daughter a book. I want these printed, he said. Not for profit. For proof. The city needs to see what they're erasing. Mara ran her fingers across the photos, pausing on one of an elderly woman smiling shyly at the camera. You understand what you're risking, don't you? I've risked less and lost more, he said. Money buys safety, not sleep. Before she could respond, a voice called from the doorway. It was Councilman Reed, the same official who had ordered the inspection. 2 aides trailed behind him, phones recording, smiles rehearsed. Miss Delane, Mr. Crane, he said smoothly. A pleasure. I see the cameras found your project again. This isn't a project, Mara said. It's a home. Reed stepped inside, his shoes careful not to touch the damp spots on the floor. Homes have permits. Mara leaned against the table, silent for a long time. Finally, she said, he's right about one thing. Sympathy doesn't last. I'm not here for sympathy. Then what are you here for? Elijah met her eyes. To make sure you're not alone when the walls fall. Something flickered across her face. Fear, perhaps, or gratitude too proud to be named. You don't owe me that. I don't, he said. I owe the boy with the notebook. The woman with the hospital form. The man who finally wrote his name. She studied him, and for the first time her guard softened completely. Then you'll need to understand something, she said quietly. Once you stand with us, there's no going back. The city doesn't forgive the rich for remembering where they came from. He smiled sadly. Then it'll have to learn. Outside, thunder rolled again, though the sky was clear. The sound came from far down the dock, metal machines warming up, testing their gears for demolition. Mara closed her eyes for a moment. 2 days, she murmured. That's all we have. Elijah looked around the small room, the peeling paint, the fading banner. Then we make them count. And for the first time, they both understood that what was coming wasn't just a fight for a building, it was a reckoning for an entire city built on selective vision. The morning before demolition, day arrived with no mercy. The sky hung gray and swollen, a lid pressed tight over the city. Every sound carried too far, the hum of trucks, the clatter of tools, the metallic cough of the machines waiting for permission to destroy. Elijah Crane stood in the middle of Dock Street, coat collar turned up against the wind. Reporters lined the sidewalks, microphones poised like weapons. Across from them, Harbor House stood defiant, wrapped in yellow tape like a bruise. Mara Delane emerged from the doorway, her coat buttoned high, her expression unreadable. She carried no sign, no banner, no anger. Just resolve. You're early, she said. I couldn't sleep, Elijah answered. Neither could the city. The first demolition truck rolled closer, its tires leaving black tracks on the wet asphalt. The foreman shouted to clear the area, but no one moved. A crowd had gathered, students, volunteers, dock workers, mothers with children on their hips. They filled the street like a tide, silent but immovable. Mara climbed the steps and turned to face them. Her voice carried even without a microphone. We built this place because we were tired of waiting for permission to exist. If they take these walls, they'll have to look us in the eye while they do it. Applause rose, raw and uneven, like the sound of a city remembering its voice. Elijah stepped beside her. Cameras flashed. A reporter called out, Mr. Crane, are you officially opposing the city's redevelopment plan? He looked at the line of machines behind the tape, their steel jaws gleaming. I'm opposing forgetfulness, he said, and the idea that progress must always start by erasing someone else's story. The reporter hesitated. Is this personal for you? Yes, he said. It should be personal for everyone. The foreman barked again, voice cracking through the tension. We have orders. Move back or we'll proceed. No one moved. Then something unexpected happened. From the back of the crowd, a boy stepped forward, the same teenager who had once carried Mara's notebook. He held a sheet of paper high above his head. I can read this now, he shouted. The words cut through the noise like a flare. The crowd erupted, cheers, tears, voices calling his name. Cameras turned. The boy's small declaration became larger than any speech. Mara smiled through the swell of emotion. Elijah felt something in his chest shift, like a door opening he hadn't known was there. The foreman looked uncertain now. "We need clearance!" He called toward the city officials watching from a distance. Councilman Reed appeared, flanked by aides. He looked pale, cornered by the sight of the cameras, the crowd, the billionaire standing against his own skyline. "This is obstruction," Reed said, his voice tight. "You're interfering with city property." Mara stepped down from the steps, meeting him halfway. "No, we're protecting public memory." "That belongs to everyone." "You can't stop progress," he snapped. "Progress for whom?" she asked quietly. "For the people who build the towers or for those who clean their glass?" The crowd murmured. Reed's composure cracked for a second. "You think slogans can stop machines?" Elijah's voice rose behind her, calm but heavy. "They stopped empires before. Maybe they'll stop a few cranes." The pun wasn't lost on anyone. Reporters whispered. Reed turned, barking into his radio. "Get the mayor on the line now!" The foreman hesitated. "Sir, what's the order?" Reed didn't answer. His phone buzzed, his aide whispering something urgent in his ear. Then his face changed, confusion, then disbelief. The mayor's office just... "Revoke the clearance," the aide stammered. "They're ordering a review," the crowd gasped. The machines idled, their engines choking into silence. Mara blinked. "What did you say?" Reed glared at his aide, then at Elijah. "You did this?" Elijah shook his head. "No, the city did, when it finally looked in the mirror." The councilman turned and stormed off, his authority dissolving in the sea of cameras. Mara looked out over the crowd. For the first time in weeks, her shoulders eased. The people were hugging, crying, clapping without rhythm. The boy with the paper climbed onto the step beside her. "Does this mean we win?" he asked. She smiled softly. "It means we were heard." Elijah turned toward her, rain beginning to fall again, gentle and cleansing. "What now?" Mara looked at the condemned sign, now half torn by the wind. "Now," she said, "we build something that can't be condemned." And as the rain came harder, washing the dust from the walls, Harbor House stood not as a ruin, but as a reminder. The news broke before the rain even stopped. By noon, every major outlet carried the headline, "City halts demolition after Dock District protest." Some showed photos of the crowd. Others zoomed in on the boy with the paper. But the image that spread the fastest was the one of Mara and Elijah standing in front of Harbor House, faces lifted toward the rain. For once, the city wasn't divided by outrage. It was united by recognition. Messages poured in. Teachers offering help. Retired builders volunteering to repair the roof. One architect emailed blueprints for free. A local bakery sent food every morning. The government called it public collaboration. Mara called it finally seeing the mirror. Harbor House became more than a building. It became an idea, a stubborn proof that dignity could outlast demolition. But for Elijah, the noise around their victory felt both bright and unbearable. Every camera, every interview request carried the same question. Why did you do it? He never gave the same answer twice. Sometimes he said, "Because I could." Other times, "Because I should have sooner." But the real reason was harder to explain. It wasn't guilt anymore. It was belonging. Weeks passed. The city shifted again, quietly this time. The cranes still rose, but now they paused when they reached Dock Street, like they remembered. Inside Harbor House, classes resumed. New faces filled the room. Dock workers, nurses, children, even a few city employees curious enough to learn. Mara moved through it all with quiet grace, her voice steady as ever. She no longer looked like someone holding the world up alone. Elijah came often, but he didn't sit in the front anymore. He stayed in the back, listening, watching the way people's shoulders lifted when they wrote their names, the way laughter filled cracks that plaster never could. They stood in silence, the kind that no longer felt heavy. Outside, the city hummed with its usual chaos, but here, in this small room, the noise softened. Mara picked up one of the notebooks from the shelf. "Do you ever miss it?" The world that listens when you speak? Elijah thought for a moment. Sometimes. But I prefer this one. The world that speaks back. She nodded slowly. Then stay in it. He looked at her, at the light catching the faint scar on her wrist, and said, "If you'll let me." She didn't answer directly. Instead, she handed him a folded paper. "Read it." He opened it carefully. Inside was a list, names, plans, districts. Harbor House North, Harbor House East, Harbor House Central. They want to franchise it, he said, half smiling. No, she corrected. We want to multiply it. Every place that was forgotten deserves a voice. He traced the ink with his thumb. You're going to need help. Her eyes met his. Good thing I already have some. They laughed quietly, not the laughter of triumph, but of understanding. Two people who had learned that victory wasn't noise, but continuation. Outside, the dock lights flickered on one by one, their reflections dancing across puddles. As they walked out together, the city looked different, not richer, not fairer yet, but awake. For the first time in decades, Harbor City remembered that progress wasn't measured in glass towers, but in the people still standing in their shadows. And somewhere deep in the hum of the streets, voices began to rise, small, steady, ordinary voices spelling out their names like promises. 2 months later, Harbor City didn't sound the same. There was still traffic, still noise, still the constant hum of a restless metropolis. But beneath it, something had shifted. The silence of resignation had been replaced by the rhythm of questions. Billboards that once advertised luxury towers now carried messages from new sponsors. Every name matters. Bus stops displayed photos of students holding notebooks instead of shopping bags. The city hadn't become just, not yet, but it had become self-aware, and that was the first mercy. Harbor House stood taller now, its roof repaired, its walls painted bright blue. The faded letters were replaced with gold, but the cracks beneath the paint were left visible. So we remember, Mara said. She moved through the new space like someone who finally had permission to breathe. Classrooms buzzed. Volunteers taught reading, writing, and digital literacy. A new wing, the Elijah Crane Learning Hall, stood quietly at the back, funded anonymously at first, but no longer hidden. Reporters came again, this time asking softer questions. What's next? How far will it go? Mara smiled. As far as we can carry it. Elijah stayed mostly in the background. He attended meetings, signed papers, and deflected praise. When people thanked him, he'd point to the students. They built this. I just learned how to see. But behind closed doors, he knew the real work had just begun. The city's elite were divided. Some called him a visionary. Others called him a traitor to his class. Invitations dried up. Investors pulled out. The board whispered words like unstable and sentimental. He didn't fight it. He'd spent too many years being invited to rooms that required him to leave his conscience at the door. One evening, he stood at the docks again. The wind carried the sound of laughter from inside Harbor House, adults reading aloud, stumbling over words, then cheering when they got them right. Mara joined him, hands in her coat pockets. You still come here when no one's watching? Habit, he said. Reminds me what truth sounds like, she smiled. Truth is loud now. We have 5 new centers open across the city. People call, asking how to start their own. Even schools are copying our methods. That doesn't scare you? He asked. A little, she admitted. But fear means we're touching something real. He nodded slowly. You've become a movement. She looked back at the glowing windows. No, we have. You gave it weight. I gave it words. For a moment, neither spoke. The sea breeze rattled the metal signs, whispering through the alleyways like a ghost learning to sing. Then Mara turned to him, her voice quieter. Do you ever wonder why you followed me that night? He smiled, remembering. I thought you were hiding something. You were right, she said. I was hiding purpose. Most people do until someone notices. He looked at her for a long time. Then I hope I never stop noticing. Inside, a bell rang, signaling the end of class. Dozens of students poured out, waving papers, laughing, shouting goodbyes. Among them was the boy from that first protest, now taller, holding a worn notebook close to his chest. He stopped in front of Elijah. "Sir, they want me to help teach next month." Elijah smiled. "Then teach them what you taught me." The boy frowned. "What's that?" "That some walls don't fall. They just learn to open." The boy grinned, nodded, and ran off. Mara watched him go, then looked back at Elijah. "You know, they'll make a movie about this one day." He laughed softly. "Then promise me something." "What?" "Make sure they show the cracks in the walls." "I will," she said. "That's where the light comes from." For a while, they stood there in easy silence, two silhouettes framed by the hum of a city relearning empathy. Behind them, the gold letters of Harbor House glowed in the dusk, not as a monument, but as a living promise that justice, once awakened, doesn't go back to sleep. A year passed. The city had changed, not in architecture, but in attention. It had learned the language of small things. Handwritten signs, free libraries, people calling each other by name instead of title. The skyline still glittered, but now the light reached places it once ignored. Harbor House became a landmark without trying. Field trips came from schools uptown, where children sat cross-legged on the floor, listening to stories about letters and second chances. Tourists snapped photos of the mural, the woman with the book, her silhouette rimmed in gold. Mara still refused to hang plaques or awards. "This place isn't about celebration," she said. "It's about continuation." Elijah visited less often, though never truly left. His company had changed direction. Smaller projects, fair wages, buildings that left room for sunlight instead of profit margins. His board hated it. Investors called it naive. Yet for the first time, the man who built towers felt grounded. One afternoon, he returned quietly without warning. The class was in session, adults reciting paragraphs aloud, voices stumbling and lifting again. Mara spotted him at the doorway and smiled. "Back to observe?" she teased. "No," he said. "Back to remember." He watched as the boy, now a young teacher, guided a group of dock workers through a reading exercise. The pride in his voice made Elijah's throat tighten. After class, they sat outside on the steps again, just like that first day. The air smelled of salt and books. Mara handed him a folder. "End-of-year report," she said. "We're opening 2 new centers in the North District. Both run by graduates." He flipped through the pages. Names, photos, handwritten testimonies. "I used to hide my name. Now I sign it proudly. I wrote my mother's story myself this time." He closed the folder slowly. "Every day," he said. "Because that's when I stopped walking above the world and started walking through it." She smiled, eyes glimmering with tired pride. "Then maybe you finally arrived." They sat there long after the streetlights came on. No cameras, no crowds. Just 2 people who had crossed a distance wider than wealth could measure. In the quiet, Elijah reached into his pocket and pulled out an envelope. "For you," he said. Mara frowned. "I told you I don't take donations." "It's not money," he said. She opened it. Inside was a single photograph, the original one from that rainy morning, faded now at the edges. Beneath it, he'd written a single line. "We saw. We stayed." Her hand trembled just slightly. She looked at him, then at the picture again. "It's strange," she murmured, "that a protest became a beginning." He smiled. "Maybe that's what beginnings are. Protests against forgetting." A gust of wind caught the photo, almost lifting it away, but Mara's fingers held it steady. "We should frame this," she said. "No," he replied. "Let it fade." That's how stories stay true. The street around them glowed gold in the late light. From somewhere far down the docks, a chorus of voices rose, students practicing reading aloud, one word at a time, like prayer. And for the first time, Elijah didn't feel the need to say anything more. He simply listened, to the rhythm of language returning to those who'd been denied it, to the sound of justice spoken in syllables simple enough for everyone to understand. As night settled, Mara closed her eyes and whispered, not to him but to the air, "See us now," and the city did.